Okay, so chapter 7, part 2. We are approximately page like 119 or so, and we have this moment in which Tom recognizes what the crap is going on between his wife and Gatsby, and we find out that Daisy doesn't love Gatsby for himself, doesn't love James Gatz. She loves Jay Gatsby because she talks to him about like how he's an advertisement. And then, so Tom basically at this point, he's like, oh snap, like, that's my wife. She loves that guy. Oh no. And then he goes, come on. And this is talking about Tom. Come on. His temper cracked a little. What's the matter anyhow? If we're going to town, let's go. So this is basically Tom being like, if we're going to do this, let's go. Like, if you're going to have an affair with my wife and you're going to be literally in front of me in my house, like, having a moment with her, like, right in front of me, let's go ahead. Let's talk about this. Let's just have this moment. Let's just, like, figure this out. Like, if this is what we're going to do, let's do it. So he's ready for the confrontation. And then Daisy's like, wait, are we, what, oh, it's going down, right? So she's like, we're just going to go, like, when everyone's upset. And then she tries to calm Tom down. She's like, let's have fun. Like, don't be crabby. Like, please don't be like this. And then they basically, at the top of 120, they start to leave, right? Gatsby started to speak, changed his mind, but not before Tom wheeled and faced him expectantly. Have you got your stables here? Asked Gatsby with an effort. About a quarter of a mile down the road. Oh, a pause. I don't see the idea of going to town, broke out Tom savagely. Women get these ideas, these notions in their heads. So this again is, I think, Fitzgerald struggling to show some aspect of feminism-ish, because Tom is supposed to be kind of this big, hulking, brutish beast, and Tom is basically like, I don't know why she wants to go to town, she's dumb because she's a girl, right? And so he doesn't think that women have valid ideas, and Fitzgerald is trying to show that that is wrong through Tom. However, again, the feminist critique in me is like, the only self-actualization that Daisy or Myrtle can do is through men, and they don't even do it intelligently. So I struggle with this because it's the problem of feminism when it mixes with Marxism, it, like, as far as critiques go, is that it's really difficult to separate feminist critique from Marxist critique, because women are objectified in Marxist critique. They are objects, and that's a problem. That's problematic, but so too in feminist critique, that's problematic. And so they overlap each other, but either way, both of these characters don't pass the Bechdel test. If you're interested in the Bechdel test, I'll put a link in the YouTube comments or the YouTube description what the Bechdel test is. Neither of these women pass the Bechdel test. This entire book doesn't pass the Bechdel test. Even Jordan, who's supposed to be the most feminist of all of the characters, she's awful, and she still doesn't pass the Bechdel test. So this to me is problematic feminism. And then So Tom and Gatsby have this little bit of an exchange, and then Daisy says, let's get something to drink, right? I'll get some whiskey, answered Tom. He went inside. Gatsby turned to me rigidly. I can't say anything in this house, meaning I can't talk about what's about to go down right now, right? She's got an indiscreet voice, I remarked. It's full of, I hesitated. Gatsby says, her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. So he is equating desire for Daisy with desire for money. So again, problematic feminism. Gatsby sees Daisy as an object of attainment. Even her love is an object of attainment. Having Daisy would complete the image of Gatsby. James Gatz is not about having a love for Daisy, because if it were about that, then he would take her however he could get her. He would take her as, you know, a married woman, and she can only love him in this way, then that's the way that or he would take her as you had a love. Like, at one point in time, you're a complex person and you loved someone else, and I understand that, right? But that's not what he wants. He wants Daisy in her pure whiteness, because only in her pure whiteness and her purity of only loving him, then she is his object. Okay, so anyway. At the bottom, we start to see, and this is where some people kind of get confused about who's in what car. So I'm just going to explain this to you. So at the bottom of 120, it says, "Shall we go in my car?" suggested Gatsby. He felt the hot green leather of the seat. So again, the idea of desire and money. "I ought to have left it in the shade." "Is it a standard shift?" demanded Tom. "Yes." "Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town." So there's a flip of the cars. So Tom Buchanan is driving Gatsby's car. The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby. "I don't think there's much gas," he objected. "Plenty of gas," said Tom boisterously. He looked at the gauge. "And if it runs out, I can stop at the drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays, right?" So basically, Tom is he's gonna have to stop for gas. Myrtle's gonna see him in the car. She's gonna associate the car with Tom, which is important later on when Gatsby and Daisy drive off and Daisy hits Myrtle and kills her in kind of this brutal, awful way, right? So she walked close to Gatsby, touching his coat. So this is on page 121 when they're getting into the cars. She walked close to Gatsby, touching his coat with her hand. Jordan and Tom and I got into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushed the unfamiliar gears tentatively, and we shot off into the oppressive heat, leaving them out of sight behind. "Did you see that?" demanded Tom. "See what?" He looked at me keenly, realizing that Jordan and I must have known all along. "You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you?" So Tom is like, you guys were in on this. Everyone else knows that my wife is having an affair with this Gatsby guy, because she touched him on the arm, with this Gatsby guy, and I'm the last one to know. So he's getting angrier and angrier and angrier, right? And then we're driving, and Jordan kind of calls into the carpet, and he's talking about how, like, he doesn't think Gatsby's an Oxford man. He thinks that he's, like, full of crap, and, like, all of the, like, stuff with him and his businesses is, like, I did a small investigation of his past, right? And then Jordan says, "Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch?" So she kind of calls him on a snobby attitude, and he goes, I didn't invite him to lunch. Daisy did, right? So it's even further, it's like she's putting this person in our life, and I don't like it. So then he stops and gets gas, and we see Wilson. And Wilson is becoming sicker and sicker, and there is an implication that maybe Wilson knows what's going on between Myrtle and Tom, because he seems to be, he's like greenish in color, so he's desiring more. That's why he had the conversation with Tom about the car. He's trying to make his life better. And then he says, "Big chance, no, but I could make some money on the other," right? So that's what Wilson says. And then he goes, "Why do you want money all of a sudden?" Tom says this to Wilson. "I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west." So he wants to get away from Tom Buchanan, because the implication is that Wilson has figured out that Myrtle is having an affair with Tom, and he's trying to get his wife away from her, right? And then Tom, startled, is like, "Your wife does? She's been talking about it for 10 years. He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes. And this is Wilson. "And now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away." The coupes flashed by us with a flurry of dust and a flash of the waving hand. "What do I owe you?" demanded Tom harshly. So when he says, "What do I owe you?" there's a double-sided meaning to that. Like, what do I owe you for the gas? But also, like, what do I owe you for this problems with Myrtle? Meaning she's a purchasable object. Next page, top of 124. So this is where we find out that Wilson knows that she's having some sort of an affair, but we don't know if Wilson knows that it's Tom. "I just got wised up to something funny these last 2 days," remarked Wilson. "That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car," meaning that I need money. He knows about the affair. He knows about Myrtle having an affair, and he doesn't know if it's Tom. And then Tom says, "What do I owe you?" Right? Like, what do I owe you? I've messed up your life. What do I owe you? So for him, it's a purchasable thing. Wilson's just a castaway. He's just a guy in his life. And like Wilson's love and Wilson's desires and Wilson's needs and all of these things, Tom couldn't care. Wilson is part of the Valley of Ashes. He's the embodiment of the Valley of Ashes. I mean, it talks about him at the end of the chapter being this like willowy young man who just like goes along with everything in society, and like he laughs genially but doesn't even have any real emotion. Why doesn't he have any real emotion? Because he's exhausted, because he works all the time. Because if we're talking about Marxist critique, he's the proletariat. Like, he is the working class. He is literally worked to death. He has worked so much that his body is consumed and he is nothing but gray ash floating in the air. And like, even his life is nothing but gray ash floating in the air. Like, he has this wife that he kind of like tried to attain by seeming like he's a good guy, seeming like he's got this money, seeming like he is this way, and then he finds out that she's having an affair with some rich man, so he's trying to get her away from it, and like there's just nothing left of him. So again, 124. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment there before I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't been aligned to Tom. He had discovered that Myrtle had had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty, as if he had just got some poor girl with child. So basically, Wilson feels like because he has no money, of course his wife is going to cheat on him. Because the way that he values himself is the fact that he's got money. That's why he's trying to get money from Tom. That's why he's trying to get Myrtle. He's trying to make himself a better person only through money. It doesn't have to do with intelligence. It doesn't have to do with being a moral person. Wilson is trying to be good enough for Myrtle, and he's not good enough for Myrtle, and therefore he blames himself for her affair. On the flip side, Tom is the opposite side of that. He's almost like the other side of the coin, the mirror image of that, except that he realizes that Daisy is having an affair not because Tom's a bad guy, morally speaking, aka cheated on his wife multiple times. It's not his morality, it's because Gatsby's a shining toy, right? So he thinks that it's not his fault that Daisy cheated. He thinks it's her fault because she's too stupid to know any better and she got confused, right? So again, it's almost like Fitzgerald is trying to be feminist, sort of, maybe in his own 1920s way, right? But again, these women's lives only focus on men, and their attainment of self-actualization is only through men. And maybe that's a critique of Marxism or capitalism. Maybe that's all of those things. Or maybe it's like what Fitzgerald said. This is a man's book. It's good to know that he tried. And then, so Tom starts to feel bad because he's like, crap, I totally just ruined this guy's life. And he says, I'll let you have the car, said Tom. I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon. So he feels like he owes Wilson at least that. Like, hopefully, you know, I can sort of make up for it. Like, he realizes that, like, I'm Wilson, Wilson's me. We both had our wives cheat on us, right? So next paragraph, very last paragraph on page 124. In one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson, notice that it's Myrtle Wilson now, right? So it's like Mrs. Wilson. Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face like objects into a slowly developing picture. So basically, she's got no control over her own destiny, as opposed to Daisy, who gets to choose. So Myrtle doesn't get the option of being like, I like that one, I'm gonna be with him, or I like that one, I'm gonna be with him. Myrtle has to go with whatever guy that she has married told her that she has to go with, right? Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression I had often seen on women's faces, but on Myrtle Wilson's face, it seemed purposeless and inexplicable until I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were not fixed on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife. So Myrtle sees this yellow car, sees Tom driving the yellow car. Tom pulls up to the gas station, gets gas, talks to Wilson briefly, and there's a pretty girl in the car with him, And of course, that must be his wife, because Myrtle doesn't know what Daisy looks like, because Tom doesn't like talking about Daisy with Myrtle, because Myrtle is his mistress. So she automatically assumes that Jordan is the wife, because women are just objects. Like, clearly, if you're in the car with the woman, then that's got to be your object. It'd be like your briefcase. Like, if your briefcase were in your front seat, then obviously that must be the object that you own, right? That must be your wife, because that's how Fitzgerald has positioned women in this novel. I'm sorry. I'm doing it again. Gonna stop. Gonna stop that. I told you I have a love-hate relationship with this chapter. All right, so it goes further, and basically we get to this weird apartment, and they're still hot, right? Because the pressure's building, pressure's building, pressure's building. There's a dialogue, and the dialogue gets faster and faster because it's accelerating the action. So like on 126 and 127, they're kind of fighting back and forth about like how they knew this guy, but like the dialogue isn't really the point. It's the pacing of the dialogue. So the pacing of the dialogue, again, Baz Luhrmann does this really well. It's this building anticipation, right? So it's almost supposed to be like music. So we have this back and forth, and Daisy starts sort of deriding Tom because Tom is being rude, because Tom's ready. Like, Tom's ready to have this confrontation. Like, you are hanging out with my wife. You are, clearly in my house. Like, she loves you. You love her. Fine. Let's go ahead and have this. So Tom starts picking, right? And he's like, oh, you're an Oxford man. Really? Tell me all about Oxford, because I feel like you're not an Oxford man. Oh, and by the way, I know all of your, money and all of that stuff. Like, all of it's crap. Like, you're a bootlegger and you're nothing but dirty money. So Tom starts poking, and Daisy's like, I've had enough. And she goes, open the whiskey, Tom. And I'm on 129. Open the whiskey, Tom, she ordered, and I'll make you a mint julep. Then you won't seem so stupid to yourself. Look at the mint. So Daisy's like lashing out at Tom. Wait a minute, snapped Tom. I want to ask Mr. Gatsby one more question. Go on, said Gatsby politely. What kind of a row are you trying to cause in my house? So a row in this case means a fight. So what kind of fight are you trying to cause in my house anyhow? And then so Daisy basically says, you aren't trying to cause a fight. Let's talk about having a fight, right? Show a little self-control. And then top of 130, Tom says, self-control, repeated Tom incredulously. I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from Nowhere make love to your wife, right? So notice that it's your wife, like not you as a person, not you, Daisy, that I care about. You're my object, I own you, you're my wife. You're my object that you get to do the things, and I say that you do the things. Well, if that's the idea, you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin sneering at family life and family institutions, and here comes Tom's racism. And the next thing you know, they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. So he sees the loss of his wife as the loss of property, and it's the loss of all white civilization. So like, if we allow white people to just forget about family values, and the next thing you know, these black people will be coming along, and like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, Tom, stop being racist. So this is, again, Fitzgerald confronting the idea of racism and socialism and class and misogyny and sexism, and all of it sort of rolled up into one. And I think this is a little messy the way he does it, but maybe that's appropriate. Maybe it's supposed to be kind of messy and all over the place, because that's kind of how relationships are, right? It's not clearly delineated. So for those of you that are interested, this type of critique is intersectionality. So intersectionality, and it's the different sections of the way people are othered. And again, if you have problems with this type of criticism, if you're like, that's not what's going on, you are completely and totally misreading this novel, please, please, please disagree with me. That's how you should approach a novel. You should absolutely have multiple readings of this and be like, historically speaking, that none of that is true. Please argue against me. Like, if you feel as though I am reading too much feminist, too much Marxist, too much intersectionality, too much postmodern nonsense, like, stop reading Derrida, Kohanimweb, like, you're ruining this book. Absolutely and totally disagree with me, but use the text to back up your argument. You should have these types of conversations and these types of debates. Please don't just take my word for it. Like, absolutely dive into this and have your own convictions about this book, because it is a pivotal American novel. All right, so, and then Jordan, because she's terrible, like, tries to interject some sort of logic, so she's a little classist too. So flushed with his impassioned gibberish, he saw himself standing alone on the last barrier of civilization. Like, I'm the only white man that's like holding back all of these rivers of incivility, right? So like, as soon as I let my wife have an affair with in front of me, then, you know, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, right? And Jordan goes, "We're all white here," murmured Jordan. Thanks, Jordan. That's very appropriate. We appreciate you. So at the bottom of 130, Gatsby is trying to get Tom to understand his belief about Daisy. So he says, "She never loved you. Do you hear?" He cried suddenly. "She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. It was a terrible mistake, but in her heart, she never loved anyone except me." So Gatsby's desire is to erase the love and to make Daisy pure for him, right? So Daisy is like this object that Tom and Gatsby are like batting back and forth like a tennis ball. "Sit down, Daisy." Tom's voice groped unsuccessfully for the paternal note, right? So he's trying to act like her father. Remember we talked about that before, is that once you release your parents' understanding of command and like giving, right? That's that Marxist notion again, that you try and find some authority figure besides your parents to replace it. So the paternal tone is Tom treating her like a child. What's been going on? I want to hear all about it, right? So Daisy then sort of goes back and forth, and she's just like, you know, "You've been seeing this fellow for 5 years," and Tom is speaking for her, like she's not even allowed to talk. He's like, "No, not seeing, but she's been dreaming of me," and Daisy's just like, "Apparently I've been dreaming of him," right? So, and then Tom goes, "You're crazy," he exploded. "I can't speak about what happened 5 years ago because I didn't know Daisy then, and I'll be damned if I'll see how you go within a mile of her unless you bought the groceries to the back door." So again, the idea of classism, like, you can't afford her. You know that I'm too expensive. Did I just quote Billie Eilish? I feel like I just quoted Billie Eilish. Anyway, so top of 132, and then Tom is trying to get Daisy back, and he says, "Daisy, that's all over now," he said earnestly. "It doesn't matter anymore. Just," and then, sorry, this is Gatsby. I apologize. "Daisy, that's all over now," he said earnestly. "It doesn't matter anymore. Just tell him the truth, that you never loved him, and it's all wiped out forever." So remember when Gatsby said, "Repeat the past," of course you can. This is him trying to redo the past. He's trying to erase the past that Daisy had with Tom in order to make this new, perfect, pure Daisy, this like trophy Daisy, just for him, because women are objects. Anyway, "Please don't," and this is Daisy finally. "Please don't." Her voice was cold, but the rancor was gone from it. She looked at Gatsby. "There, Jay," she said, but her hand was, as tried to light a cigarette, was trembling. Suddenly she threw the cigarette and the burning match on the carpet. "Oh, you want too much," she cried, Gatsby. "I love you now. Isn't that enough? I can't help what's past." She began to sob helplessly. "I did love him once, but I loved you too." So she wants to not erase the past. She wants to have simultaneously love for him and love for Tom at the same time. Gatsby's eyes opened and closed. "You loved me too?" he repeated. "Even that's a lie," said Tom savagely. "She didn't know you were alive. Why, there are things between Daisy and me that you'll never know. Things that neither of us can forget. I want to speak to Daisy alone," he insisted. "She's all excited now, right?" So again, she's got a choice, but she can't choose because she's so easily manipulated by these men. Fitzgerald is trying to be a feminist. Like, she wants to choose. She can choose, but she's confused. I think also Fitzgerald, you know, so the other aspect of the feminist critique could be that, you know, again, she's put on the glasses of the oppressor, and like that's what's happened, is that she feels like she can't choose. All right, so Page 134, Daisy, who was staring terrified between Gatsby and her husband and at Jordan, who begun to balance an invisible but absorbing object on the tip of her nose. So Jordan's trying to be snotty, so she's like, right? Then I turned back to Gatsby, and he was startled at his expression. He looked, and this is in all contempt for the babbled slander of his garden, as if he had, quote, killed a man. For a moment, the set of his face could be described in just that fantastic way. So Daisy is terrified of how Gatsby got his fortune, and she's starting to realize that he's a criminal, and his suit is a veneer. So that advertisement comment that she made, it's true. He is an advertisement. He's false. So she is rejecting Gatsby because he's not her class. He's a criminal, and his fortune is a lie, right? So his suit, Gatsby's suit, is like George's suit. Remember, George Wilson borrowed a suit, and it was like a fancy suit, and Myrtle fell for it. Daisy's not falling for it. It passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against the accusations that had been made, meaning that Gatsby is like, no, that's not how I got my fortune, I swear. But with every word, she was drawing further and further into herself, so he gave that up, and notice that now the dream is dead. Because it was the platonic conception, and Daisy was the dream, right? And now the dream is dead. Fought on as the afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible, meaning trying to touch what you can't touch, struggling unhappily, undespairingly toward the lost voice across the room. So whether alive then gone or never there, Gatsby's paragon can't survive. So basically, if Gatsby's love is supposed to be the sort of Marxist notion, the capitalist notion of the American dream, material wealth, you can lose it, right? Great Depression. Or maybe it was never meant to be initially, right? So desire and motivation, whether they are for a woman or a love or a paragon or wealth, if you make it so that it is so perfect, so that it is like a butterfly wing, so that it is gossamer, so that it is fairy-like, so that it is a dream, if you make it into your head and you build it up and you build it up and you build it up to be this thing, whatever it is going to eventually become unattainable. And even if you have it for a moment, you're going to lose it, because either it's not going to live up to your expectation, or you just lose it. Just like with money, like you can lose money overnight. You know, there's a statistic that came out, I think 10 years ago or so, that said that basically every American's living like 2 paychecks away from poverty. You know, that it doesn't take hardly anything to put us into poverty. And so, like, if we say that the American dream is based on money, and again, this is a Marxist critique, so please feel free to disagree. If we say that the American dream is based on monetary success, having the nice house, having the nice car, having the 2.5 kids in the white picket fence, then just as easily, because it's an exterior understanding, it can be swept away. So too, if we think about the idea of love and someone else and being dependent on that being your paragon, that's also outside yourself, right? So because it's an external thing, that means ultimately it's going to be difficult for us to say that whatever that paragon is, the platonic conception, that externalization of perfection, is attainable, because even if we have it for a second, it can go away, or it's not going to live up to expectations. All right, so let's end on this, because I'm going to do one more part. Again, I told you this is a long chapter. It's the climax of the novel, so I might have to do 2 parts, hopefully just one more part. On 135, her frightened eyes told that whatever intentions, whatever courage she had were definitely gone. So Daisy is not going to go with Gatsby. She wanted to be with Gatsby, but then she realizes that her class, because she was born with this royalty, this like American, Dutch royalty, basically, she will never be with Gatsby because he's not on the same level as her, you know, because he got his fortune through the American dream by working hard, but he got his fortune through, you know, these sort of undesirable means, you know, through bootlegging and you know, illegal activity. Let's see. She looked at Tom, alarmed now, but he insisted with magnanimous scorn. Go on, he won't annoy you. I think he realizes that his presumptuous little flirtation is over. They were gone without a word, snapped out, made accidental, isolated, like ghosts, even from our pity. So, doesn't exist anymore. After a moment, Tom got up and began wrapping the unopened bottle of whiskey in the towel. You want any of this stuff? Jordan, Nick? I didn't answer. Nick, he asked again. What? Want any? No, I just remembered today is my birthday. I was 30. Before me stretched the portentous, menacing road of the new decade. Before me, the portentous. If something is portentous, that means that it's going to give you a sign of something to come, of the next decade. So if we're talking about the United States at a turning point, that's what Fitzgerald is arguing. Nick Carraway is the United States. We are at a turning point in this country when we, and again, this is like Marxist criticism, so please feel free to disagree. Fitzgerald is arguing that Nick Carraway is us, our lens on the world, and seeing these two understandings of the American dream, of the paragon, of what it takes. We have 10 years to get this right. We can change the fact that if we make the American dream about money, it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be right. It's never going to be realizable. The portentous, menacing road of a new decade. Okay? So just like the car, we have the chance to steer the car in the right direction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there, and then I'll probably just do one more, and that will be the end of chapter 7. And remember, now we're on the downward slope after this, because the end of chapter 7 is the climax of the novel. Okay, so I'll see you guys soon.